In a football match, an entire country can breathe as a single body. On the 19th of July, 2026, Argentina stepped onto the grandest stage of World Cup football, carrying the hopes and dreams of millions. Though the ultimate victory narrowly slipped away after an intense battle. That unforgettable journey once again proved how a simple game can compel a vast, proud nation to look entirely in one direction. For a few fleeting hours, strangers embraced on the streets. Generations sang the exact same anthems. Temporary differences vanished, and a country transformed into a single, unified community. But the next morning, the brilliant stadium lights are replaced by the harsh fluorescent glow of a neighborhood grocery store. A shopkeeper silently swaps out a price tag. A retiree carefully opens a worn wallet. A customer hesitates, then places a basic item back on the shelf. Another checks the morning exchange rate on a cracked screen. This is the real life behind the glory of Argentina's football nation. An economy once built on endlessly fertile lands and global exports, now navigated by families forced to live with volatile, unpredictable prices. From the high peaks of the Andes to the freezing winds of Patagonia, it is a story of how mate, asado, and football serve as profound rituals of connection. It is the story of young people caught between the painful choice of leaving for stability or staying for belonging. Perhaps we all crave a moment like that in the stadium, when the person standing beside us is no longer a stranger. And something far greater than ourselves unites our gaze. But when the singing finally fades and the monthly bills return, what is it that still keeps Argentina together? From high, cloud-touching peaks to the very edge of the Southern Ocean, the map of South America unfolds in a vast strip of striking contrasts. Argentina has never been a single, uniform world. In the northeast, subtropical forests blend seamlessly into boundless river networks. Water rushes over the precipice of Iguazu Falls into deep abysses, nurturing sprawling marshlands and vital water trade routes. Moving toward the center, the flat and fertile Pampas plains stretch endlessly toward the horizon, where massive cattle herds and golden grain fields once helped propel this nation into the ranks of global prosperity. Yet when the camera shifts westward, the towering Andes rise like formidable stone walls, sheltering sun-drenched wine valleys and blinding white salt flats. Here, new lithium extractions spark intense competition among investment, job creation, water resource needs, and indigenous territorial rights. At the very south, Patagonian winds howl across freezing steppes, where gas is harvested, sheep graze, and immense geographical distances inflate the daily costs of life. From above, natural resources are everywhere. Water flows from cloud forests down to valleys. Trucks carry grain toward coastal ports, pipelines stretch across vast landscapes, and minerals leave the highlands to enter global supply chains. However, natural wealth never automatically translates into a stable life for ordinary people. Between the fertile fields and a family dining table lie complex layers of infrastructure, land ownership, energy costs, shifting exchange rates, and public policies. If this land possesses almost everything required for abundance, where does the profound fragility truly begin? To find the answer, one cannot simply view Argentina from the sky. One must step down to the streets, where the macroeconomy touches a grocery basket, a family kitchen, and an ordinary day. Morning arrives across the sprawling avenues of Buenos Aires, with the steady, familiar drone of commuter buses carrying workers toward their destinations. Heavy metal shutters screech open along the commercial strips. Cafes sweep their sidewalks, and trays of freshly baked media luna are neatly stacked behind glass display windows. Delivery workers pause to check their morning invoices, while retirees hurry to local neighborhood markets, just as the vendors lift their protective grates, hoping to secure their essentials before prices shift yet again. There is no sudden, dramatic alarm bell announcing the arrival of inflation. Instead, it seeps into daily life very quietly. A fresh price sticker is layered directly over an old one on a grocery shelf. A shopkeeper punches numbers into a handheld calculator with practiced fatigue. A customer pauses, carefully comparing two different brands of flour. Then gently places one package back on the shelf. Another shopper counts out loose paper pesos, verifying every single bill. We watch a single peso note move through its ordinary daily cycle. It leaves a modest pension or a weekly factory wage, enters a crowded neighborhood grocery store, passes into the hands of the merchant, and is quickly used to pay off a local supplier. It returns to the financial system, but its purchasing power has already quietly eroded along the way. The currency keeps moving, yet the deeper anxiety felt across the community. Is not merely where the money goes, but how much actual life remains in it when it finally returns to the hands that earned it. As afternoon approaches, the relentless pace softens. In corner cafes and crowded family kitchens, the ritual of merienda begins. Mate is poured from a thermos, bread is toasted, and dulce de leche is spread thickly across plates. Children return from school, backpacks swinging, and adults gather to talk in low, serious voices about rising prices, uncertain jobs, and fragile family plans for the coming months. Night falls late in this part of the world. Inside a narrow casa chorizo, multiple generations gather around a long wooden table. Behind an elegant European-facing facade lies a shared open-air courtyard where family members pass by one another every single day. Sharing the emotional and financial burden of keeping a household running smoothly despite the pressures outside. We often imagine that a profound societal crisis arrives with a deafening noise and sudden destruction. But for most ordinary people, it arrives very softly in the exact moment a basic food item is placed back on a shelf, and an ordinary meal must be calculated all over again. The early story of Argentina's rise is written upon an endless flat canvas of emerald earth. Across the vast expanses of the Pampas, fertile soil met an era of boundless optimism. Here, vast estancias stood miles apart, where cattle grazed freely under open skies and modern agricultural machinery began to reshape the rhythm of the land. Yet, grain and livestock alone could not build an economy. The true turning point demanded connection. Railroad tracks were laid straight across the grassy plains, stitching distant farms directly to bustling coastal ports. Soon after, refrigerated shipping technology unlocked a monumental breakthrough. Allowing fresh Argentine beef to cross the Atlantic and arrive safely on European dining tables. Demand from across the ocean poured in, fueling an economic golden age. But the physical wealth of this nation was built just as much by the human hands that arrived on its shores. Millions of immigrants from Italy, Spain, Wales, Syria, Lebanon, and beyond stepped off ships into a new world. They brought specialized skills, labor, recipes, music, and distinct cultural textures. And yet, this heavy reliance on a single primary model also planted the seeds of future vulnerability. An economy overly dependent on land exports and raw agricultural commodities remains intrinsically sensitive to shifting international markets and overseas demand. Tensions perpetually simmered between the bustling port centers of power and the neglected interior provinces, while policies swung wildly across political cycles. History reminds us that during the early 20th century, Argentina ranked comfortably among the wealthiest nations per capita globally. But that historical height came with an inherent trade-off. The very same plains that created such staggering prosperity also bound the fate of the country to volatile global currents entirely outside the control of any ordinary household. The heavy cut of beef returns once more to a humble neighborhood butcher counter. There, the shopkeeper trims away a smaller portion than before, because a regular customer simply needs to reduce expenses today. True wealth may be borne out on the open grasslands, flowing seamlessly through grand ports and into national ledgers. But within a family kitchen, its true value is measured strictly by how many people can still afford to sit down together. And when formal systems fail to provide a sense of enduring security, where do people turn next? Water is carefully heated in a worn metal kettle, never allowed to reach a violent roaring boil. Yerba mate leaves are tilted gently to one side, and a silver bombilla is settled precisely into place. One person pours the steaming water. Another drinks it entirely. Hands the gourd back to the preparer and watches as it is passed along to the next waiting hand. This simple ritual appears everywhere. In crowded public parks, inside idling vehicles, during hurried work breaks, beside windswept coastal roads, and deep within quiet family kitchens. A mate gourd is passed from person to person not out of commercial transaction, but out of quiet trust. The unstable peso changes its purchasing power by the hour, yet the ancient rhythm of the mate circle remains steady, offering a comforting sense of predictability. As afternoon fades into evening, the pace of the day slows down further. In corner cafes and warm family kitchens, merienda begins. Coffee is poured, toast is buttered, and thick layers of dulce de leche are spread across fresh pastries. This daily pause does more than just stave off hunger. It serves as a bridge connecting the afternoon directly to the night, giving friends and family members yet another meaningful reason to remain seated together just a little longer. Outside in the courtyard, fire for the asado starts long before a single cut of meat touches the iron grate. Coals glow evenly, watched over by an experienced asador who reads the wind direction and measures the heat with an open palm. Sausages and organ meats arrive first, while larger, prized cuts follow hours later, long after the conversation has stretched across generations and everyone has stopped checking the time. In a society where soaring prices force families to calculate every coin, the weekend asado creates a sacred space where nobody is permitted to rush. It is a form of collective cooperation, where costs are shared and burdens are lightened simply by standing close to the fire. Mate does not halt inflation. An asado does not rewrite national economic policy. Generations living under a single roof do not always agree on everything, and this mutual reliance is sometimes born from necessity rather than pure choice. In many of our own families, there was always someone like that, someone who stood closer to the stove than the dining table. Serving everyone else before finally sitting down. And sometimes, only when their chair remains empty do we truly realize how quietly they held an entire family together. But if community can shield human beings from profound uncertainty, what happens in places where geographical isolation makes even community difficult to maintain? From the towering heights of the northern Andes down to the windswept channels of Tierra del Fuego, Argentina refuses to be captured by a single image. Different landscapes demand entirely different ways of surviving. High up on the rugged Puna Plateau, the air is thin and biting. Traditional adobe houses with thick mud walls trap warmth against the freezing nights, while National Route 52 winds through dramatic mountain ranges where the color of the earth shifts with every turn. In these remote villages, coca leaves are chewed to ease the altitude sickness, and ancient rituals dedicated to Pachamama, Mother Earth, quietly coexist with Catholic imagery. Yet, as lithium extraction expands across the Great Salt Flats, a profound tension arises over scarce groundwater, indigenous territorial rights, and the fragile future of local communities. Further east, the arid landscape gives way to the deep green shadows of the subtropical cloud forests. And the vast, flooded wilderness of the Ibarra marshes. Here, life moves to the rhythm of rivers, where traditional fishers and Guarani communities preserve a food culture of cassava, corn, and river fish that stretches back far beyond modern national borders. Further south, the monumental flatlands of the Pampas give way to the wild coasts of Patagonia, where southern right whales gather in sheltered bays and fierce ocean winds test the endurance of isolated shepherds and resilient fishermen. Even in the middle of the remote Patagonian steppe, unexpected echoes of history survive. In quiet towns like Gaiman, families gather to pour black tea and slice fruitcakes, keeping Welsh traditions alive thousands of miles from their ancestral homeland. Different climates and isolated geographies do not merely shape distinct ways of making a living. They tell the stories of communities that were pushed away, traveled far, or decided to stay against all odds. Across these distant regions, a young person checks a glowing smartphone screen, reading a digital message from a relative living far away in a bustling metropolis or overseas. A silent longing lingers in the air, hinting at journeys yet to come. These contrasting landscapes and disparate lives require a shared narrative to recognize that they belong to one and the same country. Argentina finds that unifying voice not just in politics, but deep within its enduring myths, music, and cultural symbols. Culture serves as the mirror through which a nation attempts to explain its own existence. In Argentina, that reflection is built upon powerful figures and enduring rituals that transcend ordinary politics. Tango was born not in grand halls, but within the damp walls of working-class tenement courtyards, bustling ports, and narrow alleyways. Here, diverse immigrant communities lived packed closely together, sharing hardship and longing. The weeping lament of the bandoneon carried the heavy sorrow of exile, shifting neighborhoods, and lost love. Tango is far more than a passionate dance. It is an emotional architecture designed to help those far from home live alongside their memories. Across the sprawling countryside, the Gaucho emerged as a timeless symbol of absolute freedom. These solitary horsemen roamed the boundless plains before the arrival of barbed wire and private estates. When the grasslands were fenced in and divided by wealthy landowners, that independent lifestyle gradually faded away. Yet the Gaucho stepped out of daily reality and into the nation's literary imagination as an enduring emblem of pride. That same popular spirit echoes along dusty roads where small shrines draped in vivid red fabric honor Gauchito Gil. Drivers stop to leave offerings and whisper quiet prayers, seeking protection in places where formal institutional systems fail to reach. National identity is further magnified through the colossal figures of Diego Maradona and Lionel Messi. Maradona represents raw genius, defiance, and passionate chaos. The ability to rise up from the margins against all odds, Messi evokes quiet discipline, family devotion, and unyielding persistence. They are not merely compared by goals scored, but as two distinct lenses through which the country views its own soul. Football offers Argentina a powerful shared language, but a shared language does not automatically heal a fragmented history. Amidst the cheering crowds, shadows of the past still linger, reminding the nation that true understanding requires confronting the stories left untold. Every nation needs heroes to weave the fabric of its own story. Yet, a society only begins to truly understand itself when it summons the courage to face the human lives left outside that narrative. Long before modern borders were ever drawn across South America, ancient hands pressed rich red pigments against the cold stone walls of Cueva de las Manos in Patagonia. Generations of hunting communities left their enduring marks in the exact same sacred space, long before Argentina had a capital, a flag, or a name. Later, 19th century state expansion marched southward under the banner of the conquest of the desert. The official name suggested an empty, waiting wilderness, ignoring the indigenous communities that already called those lands home. While the campaign opened vast estates to new ownership and state control, it forced thousands of native inhabitants into displacement, captivity, or death. Decades later, the tragedy of Napalpi in the Chaco region exposed the brutal underside of rural labor exploitation, when striking indigenous workers faced lethal state suppression. In the heart of Buenos Aires, the cobblestones of Plaza de Mayo have long borne witness to political power, passionate hope, and devastating loss. During the dark years of military dictatorship, thousands of citizens were systematically abducted and made to vanish. Yet, through the relentless marches of the mothers and grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo, and through spaces of memory like the former ESMA, the nation chose remembrance over silence. Argentina did not simply heal its past. It built institutional mechanisms to ensure accountability. But how a society interprets its history remains fiercely contested. We cannot hold on to only the memories that fill us with pride. When the names of the lost are no longer spoken aloud, the boundaries protecting the present begin to dissolve. Institutional trust is shaped not just by economic ledgers, but by how a nation wields power, remembers its wounds, and protects its most vulnerable communities. The debate over Argentina's future is never played out solely within abstract economic halls. It is a deeply personal calculation, written into the everyday rhythm of households across the nation. By mid-2026, official data from INDEC recorded monthly inflation stabilizing around 1.9%. While the urban poverty rate registered at 28.2% during the latter half of the previous year. Yet, such macroeconomic figures cannot fully capture the daily tension felt inside living rooms. International institutions like the IMF point to fiscal discipline and market reforms as vital steps toward long-term stabilization. While critics warn of the heavy social toll, shrinking purchasing power, and the immediate pressures placed on retirees and vulnerable families, supporters see an opportunity to finally restore structural order, curb currency printing, and attract much-needed foreign investment. Opponents see a painful path where basic utility bills, food costs, and medicine prices outpace wages, forcing ordinary citizens to constantly delay their family plans. Nowhere is this tension more visible than when policy collides with the natural world. High up in the northern Puna, vast salt flats mirror the infinite sky above, while heavy mining trucks rumble past, carrying lithium toward global supply chains. Proponents argue that the white metal brings essential revenue, jobs, and national growth. But local indigenous communities watch closely, fearing the depletion of fragile groundwater and the quiet erosion of their ancestral territories. Further down in the suburbs, a young person's room reveals a different kind of uncertainty. An open suitcase rests on a bed, alongside an Argentinian passport, family photographs, and an old football jersey. Parents watch from the doorway, keeping their anxieties hidden beneath quiet words. Many of us have left a place behind in search of something better elsewhere. But leaving is never merely a change of address. It is learning to live suspended between two worlds, where you no longer entirely belong to either. When a young person finally closes that suitcase and departs, a nation loses far more than just another working pair of hands. A family dining table loses a permanent seat, parents lose a comforting presence in their aging years, and children of the future may grow up speaking a different tongue in a distant land. Argentina remains caught between competing economic visions. Uncertain whether its current reforms will lead to enduring stability or simply open yet another difficult cycle. But while waiting for answers, the water is still boiled, the fire is still lit, and a place is kept waiting at the table. The stadium lights have gone dark, and the crowds have vanished into the night. A solitary worker sweeps away paper scraps on empty concrete steps. A neighborhood shopkeeper locks his door, turning off the fluorescent lights. Across town, hot water is poured into a metal kettle once more, and glowing charcoal embers crackle quietly in an outdoor hearth. An aging chair is pulled close to a wooden table, while an open suitcase remains resting in a quiet room. The unstable peso represents the uncertainties of tomorrow, yet the mate gourd passed from hand to hand represents the trust people still choose to give one another. Football proves that society can still unite as a single community. Argentina has not yet solved its deepest paradox, but every single day, its people continue to pour the water, share a place around the table, and prepare for a tomorrow that remains unwritten.